Welcome to the Childcare Revolution podcast, where we talk about all things childcare.
Hi, my name is Tegan.
And I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Patricia. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Before we get on with our recording, we just wanted to hold a moment of silence in honor of Regis Korchinski-Paquette and all other victims of police brutality and systemic racism in Canada and around the world.
So on May 27th, the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare and the Association of Early Childhood Educators of Ontario released a report. It's called From Reopening to Recovery, a plan for childcare reopening in Ontario and moving to a publicly funded system. And today we will be discussing the recommendations from the report. And we will have two parts. In this first part, we will cover how the recommendations would affect educators and staff if they were adopted. And on the second part, we will have a parent on board with us to listen to their perspective.
That was amazing. That was beautiful.
A quick summary of the From Reopening to Recovery document is a plan created by the AECEO and OCBCC to tackle the ineffective and non-existent planning by the government for the reopening of childcare once the emergency order is lifted. This information was collected through an online survey of 3,735 people in the sector, conversations and consultations with individuals in the field, and webinars. The time frame of following through with this plan relies on decrease in numbers of cases, availability of PPE, and meeting testing targets. If all points are met, then reopening will begin in stage 2.
So, to anyone listening out there, today is May 30th. So the report has been out for 3 days, and I think that I've read it at least 3 times in its entirety because it was really well written, and especially considering that Carolyn and Alana, who are the people who wrote most of the report, didn't have a lot of time to do it. Between closing the survey and releasing the report, it wasn't that much time. It's everything that I personally hope for in changes for the sector.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, when I thought about a reform for early childhood education and care in Ontario, I didn't think about a pandemic 6 months ago, right? So there's that lens to it. But we've been talking a lot about reopening, and we've been talking a lot about June is too soon, and we're not ready, and there's not enough information. And I think that these recommendations, they tackle those fears really well, because it begins with recommendation number 1 is a minimum of 3 weeks notice before reopening. And that's already with us from the sector having had access to reopening guidelines.
And what do you think a childcare provider would use those 3 weeks to prepare? Like what kind of work they have to prepare for before reopening?
So much that they have to prepare for. First off, they have to see what parents are interested in coming back. So they need to start talking to parents and giving the parents enough notice of when they are able to return. Yeah. So like these are the things that operators have to prepare before they even can open it to the public, first off. But then there's also the issues of program planning might look a little bit different as well. So they also need that time to properly create activities that are going to be interest-based, still follow the guides of play, and making sure that these children have access to be able to have the fullest opportunities in that center, even if there are stricter guidelines. So those are a lot of the things that operators need to prepare for.
But also we need to give access to the buildings to educators themselves so that we can change our rooms,
Yeah.
I mean, in my room alone, I think we have 5 carpets.
Oh, wow.
Those would all have to be gone, right?
Mhm.
Like all the cloth and texture, like fuzzy things that we have in our rooms, all of that has to be gone because they're not as easy to sanitize, right?
Mhm.
I mean, when thinking about my preschool group, when we come back, I believe that none of them will be napping because they're so close to JK. So the beds and washing the sheets and all of that, that wouldn't be a problem for us. But for most preschools out there, that would be an issue. Do you have access to laundry in your childcare, Stephanie? Because you work with toddlers, right?
Yes, I work with toddlers. At the moment, they aren't because the center is so new. So
Yeah.
they've been kind of taking it home and doing the laundry there.
But who
There's
takes
more
it? Is it the parents
the
or is
owner.
it
No, the
okay?
owner. The
So
owner
our
takes them.
parents take the laundry home every week.
They take home their blankets and things like that, but like the bedding,
No, our parents take everything.
the operators take home. But once there's more enrollment, then there's going to be a laundry facility.
Yeah. Because it was a very new center before you guys closed, right?
Yeah, extremely new.
So if it was opening 3 weeks from today, us educators would already know the guidelines today, which means that educators and operators and all staff already know what's going to happen and how it's going to be opening before we even announce to the public that we're reopening in 3 weeks. And going down the recommendations, it's a phased approach to reopening that meets or exceeds current best practices of emergency childcare. This includes start reopening of childcare centers with greatly reduced group sizes and enhanced ratios, keeping groups separate. Provincial guidelines on eligibility and priority for families are clear and available to operators, and base funding for all existing programs.
The reason behind this is there's a lot of pressure and responsibility on operators already as it is. And we need the government to step up and take some of that responsibility away. For instance, you can't expect an operator to decide who can and cannot enter a center solely based off of asking questions. That takes so much time. It would be very hard on families.
That criteria has to come from the government because it would be such a huge problem for childcare operators to be choosing that by themselves, right? Because people like it could feel like judging people, it could feel like discrimination, it could feel like so many things. So it has to be coming, those guidelines have to be coming from the government.
Yeah.
But then there's the thing that you were saying, that what if I'm eligible but I don't feel safe sending my child back? What if I'm eligible and I decide that instead of sending my child to childcare, I might sneeze. Hold on.
Bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. This is the Childcare Revolution podcast where we are
Whole
very
hot
germ
mess.
friendly. We're very germ friendly. What happens to those parents who choose not to send their child back because they don't feel safe, or because they have made other arrangements that make them more comfortable?
Or because they can't afford it anymore.
There's that portion too, because childcare is going to cost a lot more to reopen with all of this going on, right? Because we're going to have less children, we're going to need PPE, we're going to need more space so that we can space out different groups. Access to funding and access to money has always been a problem for childcare. With centers not running at capacity, it's going to be an even bigger problem.
And it's just a lot of unknowing and a lot of questions. So they really need a guideline from the government that says these are the first people that get to use the centers. And then from then on, once you have spaces available, this is the next set of people that are able to use this setting, because we can't have all of that responsibility on ourselves. It's way too much.
Yeah.
A lot of recommendations from this report have already been in place in other provinces like Quebec. And actually, yesterday I listened to an interview of a childcare provider in Quebec, and they reopened their centers from May 11. And she said that she considered it as a success because the government released a guideline telling them that, okay, this is a list of families that you should prioritize. And the government also provide PPE. And this is one of the recommendations from the report that we are reading to. Funding for and organized access to all necessary PPE, health and safety supplies. So the Quebec government give all the centers the PPE that they need, like mask and gloves and
Face shields, maybe?
goggles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the phase approach. So they started out with 30%, and then 50%, and then 75% before reaching their full capacity. And this is an example, and this is the success that we should learn from, right?
Yeah. I mean, Quebec is a little different from Ontario because Quebec has widely accessible childcare. So we're talking about a lot more children and a lot more families having access to it. So it's incredible that they're being successful with a lot more people to begin with, I think, right? Because there's a larger percentage of the population in Quebec that has access to care than in Ontario. But it's also not only the people that are going to have access to care, but we also, and this is included in the report, we need very clear training and guidelines on screening, because part of the reopening policies for everywhere, even for the emergency childcare centers in Ontario, is screening people that are coming into the building. And
testing?
Yeah, and we need testing as well. I mean, Doug Ford said, I think last week or this week, it's hard to know because time is a creative concept right now, that he wanted all childcare staff to be tested.
How?
How is that going to happen? Are they going to send like mobile testing units to all childcare centers that are open? Is
Or
that
are we going to be expected to do it on our own time?
Yeah.
So they're not fully thinking, and that's why this plan is set in place to begin with.
And this is the thing, they might be thinking about these things, but they're not being open with the sector. We're very much in the dark. I mean, every time that I hear from my executive director, she talks about how disappointed she is with Toronto's children's services because they've been completely silent through all this. She's tried to contact them a few times and they don't get back to her. So that's a little confusing. That's very frustrating. And I mean, when should someone get tested? Is it when they show symptoms? Is it when someone they live with shows symptoms? Like, all of those things need to be thought about. Like, for me, if I go back to work, my partner, I almost called him my husband. Oh my God. My partner would also be going back to work, and meaning he's also having contact with people. What if he gets sick or he carries the virus and whatever? Like, that's something we need to be thinking about too.
And even with the testing, there's tons of false positives and false negatives, right? Like, even the test has to be done properly, because I know that was an issue before of the test not being properly done and people are leaving saying that they're negative, but they may have not been negative the whole time, or maybe they tested a different.
It's a huge issue in Brazil right now, the lack of accuracy of tests. And to talk about reopening childcare, we need that to be in better shape, right? But to go to phase 2, we would have to get to 16,000 tests a day.
And they can't be traced back to an original source.
Yeah.
And the number of cases have also dropped.
They also need to be dropped. So we have time to get there because we haven't reached any of those benchmarks yet.
Nope.
When we talk about one of the recommendations is repurposing public space to increase available physical space for childcare. Yesterday, I was looking at a video of a zoo in the States. You know those videos of the penguins going through like the reptile area or the aquarium because there's no people in the zoos? And I just thought like, oh, what if we repurposed the space at the Toronto Zoo and we started running a childcare from there? Because it is a lot of open space. Like, children would have access to like gross motor play and being outside in nature, and you get to see all these animals. So especially like when you look, I think it's Norway that is repurposing their like touristic attractions and landmarks as spaces for childcare. And then I just started thinking, what if we did that in Toronto, you know?
Yeah. And that's incredible, like from a pedagogy point of view, like having children in contact with nature more, with plants and everything. And it's actually, I think it benefits the physical distancing too, to have children outdoors more than indoors.
Especially like right now, I mean, it's not even officially summer yet, and it's pretty hot, right? Like today and yesterday were a little cooler, but the past few days were really, really hot. Very likely we're not going to be able to turn on air conditioning if we have them in our centers.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Right? Because we're trying to contain a disease that's not airborne, but
Yeah.
that has to do with contact and droplets and all of that. So
Yeah.
if we're able to stay outside more and we have more outdoor spaces, that promotes not only physical distancing, but it also promotes a spread of droplets on things that wouldn't be children or adults.
That's so true. I didn't even think of that. Like having 24 children in a space with no AC in the summer.
Toronto summer gets pretty hot and pretty humid. So it would be like being inside a sauna with no AC. Going down the list, one of the other core recommendations is pay time for staff to return and prepare programs and to undertake training that would last a minimum of 3 weeks. And 83% of people that answered to the survey by the AECEO said that this would be reassuring and important when coming back to work. I agree and sign underneath this because this is one of my main priorities. We need time to prepare and think about our spaces and to be trained because there's so much of this that we don't know what it's going to look like.
And one of the most important aspects about training is how to use PPE.
Yeah. Because I think that even as like just from looking at things on the internet, like scrolling down my Facebook newsfeed, I see like videos of nurses or other healthcare professionals showing how to properly put on and take off gloves or properly put on and take off masks. And when should we do that? When is it, do we wash our hands before? Do we wash our hands after? Is it both? Like there's so many questions that because we're not used to using those kind of materials, we need to be properly trained, right? And and also if the government is asking that childcare staff is doing the screening before going into the program, we need to be properly trained for that as well.
Yeah, an ongoing assessment of children's health and like symptoms, like throughout the day.
Yeah, and of adult health as well, right?
Yeah.
Like because right now this would mean taking our temperatures in the morning too, right?
Yeah.
Like not just the kids.
And all of this takes a lot of time throughout the day as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's not just as easy as, for us it's easy, we can get our temperature checked no problem, but sometimes when you have a little one, the thermometer is pretty frightening and it can take up to a solid 10-15 minutes to even use it on some children, depending on, because we know that sometimes they get a little bit upset, especially if they had experiences maybe going to the doctors. It might be a little bit scary for them. And we're bringing out tools that looks like they're at a doctor's appointment, right?
Yeah.
So it can be very frustrating and intimidating for them. And that's something that we have to take into consideration as well, as it's not always going to be as simple as a quick check your temperature. Okay, they're good to go, or no, they don't go.
Exactly. Especially like if you're talking about toddlers, nothing with toddlers is easy. I'm sorry. They are it is the phase of being stubborn and saying no and tantrums. Like all of that is happening. We need to think about that too.
They're supposed to do the opposite of what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And what is that going to look like for pick up and drop off? Are parents going to have like a time slot for each family to come? Like what are employers of parents going to be more lenient on them being late because it's going to depend on when they can drop off their child? Like there's so many things that need to be thought out before we say let's reopen.
Even with that too, just the fact that like if we have to be the people that get the child changed at the end of the day for the parent to pick them up, that means one person is solely going to be getting children ready and sending them home, which takes a whole person away from the group.
Which means that you need more staff.
Yes.
More staff, more money.
Yeah.
More time.
And also the huge worry that I have, which is reopening childcare and not thinking about decent work and professional pay for educators. We should not have economic recovery on the backs of the early years in childcare sector. That is enough. Like, there's so many educators out there working for minimum wage, working full-time jobs, second jobs, third jobs. And now it's the middle of a pandemic, and we're going to again be the sacrificial lamb of economic recovery. No, thank you. That's like, just thinking about that, it makes me sick and it makes me really angry, because that needs to be talked about. We're talking about protecting children, we're talking about protecting families, protecting staff, but we need to protect them not only against the virus, we need to protect them against bad conditions at work. We need to protect them against being taken advantage of. Enough is enough.
Yeah.
Sorry for the rant.
Oh no, rant on.
It's a good
Rant
one.
This one is also one of the main ones for me. Immediate increase paid sick and emergency leaves to at least 21 days.
15 in fairness.
So this week on Thursday, the 28th, I was part of a webinar that we were talking about workers' rights as workplaces reopen. And I was talking from an RACE point of view, and my main point was access to emergency leave. And before I did that, I polled on a Facebook group for educators how many sick days they get a year. And the amount of people that get 0 sick days or unpaid sick days is so high, it's heartbreaking. Like, people saying that, oh, I have 3 unpaid sick days a year, but I try my best to not use them because those 3 days of wages would be a huge difference in my budget because I'm a single mom. Like, when you hear things like that, that's not okay. It makes me so angry. I can't.
And there were also a lot of ECEs there watching the webinar and like sharing their struggles.
Yeah, because the struggle is real. Like, one of the things that I said on the webinar was that it's been 76, well, now it's been 79 days, I guess. No, 78. Oh my God, I'm good at math.
Wow.
What day is it?
It's been 78 days since I've been away from work. And it's been 78 days since I haven't had a cold. Because even with our very rigid childcare protocols of washing our hands, of covering our coughs, we still get sick. And we get sick because we're working with children, and children do not have the germ etiquette that we do, right? So we're exposed to all of that. Unfortunately, parents also don't have access to sick leave, so they send their sick children to school because it's that or losing their wages or their job, and it's a snowball.
Don't tell the ECEs in the room.
Yeah.
And it's just a whole issue. We're not blaming anybody. There's no blame here, but it's just
system.
a big issue. And it's the fact that if we don't know, then we don't know how to help the children who are sick by either kind of not quarantining them, but kind of giving them their own space so that they can still participate, but they're not always too close.
Yeah.
And when we don't know this information, then we can't act upon it. But it's a whole hot mess all the way around for both ends, for the parents and for the ECEs and for the children. So definitely 21 paid sick days for everybody across Canada would be incredibly beneficial to at least preventing certain sicknesses.
Mm-hmm. And it will be the worst thing if, because of our ignorance, a kid gets sick.
Yeah. Especially like with the findings of that syndrome that is similar to Kawasaki syndrome on children and how it's affecting other systems in their bodies. Like, that's terrifying. I don't even want to get into that because I keep picturing my kids in a hospital bed, and I don't want that. But when we talk about coming back to childcare too, recommendation number 14 on that report is clear rules for families on health screening, including requirements to disclose any symptoms or medications, emergency pickup in case of illness, and on what conditions children can return to programs after illness. That's a huge deal. Like, even before the pandemic, we already needed those guidelines. Now, during a global health crisis, we need those guidelines to be
taken seriously.
They need to be taken seriously, and they need to come from the higher ups. It needs to come from the government, because every licensed childcare center in the city says Call if your child is sick, keep them home. Call us to tell us their symptoms and whatever. And
It's
that still
even in the
doesn't happen.
policy books, but it doesn't
Exactly.
it
It
doesn't
doesn't
work.
happen. And it doesn't happen. It's not just on the parents. It's not just on the childcare centers. It's the system. If your child is sick and you're already taking time off to stay with them for one day, you're busy. You're not thinking about, oh, I have to call daycare. Right? So if it doesn't become a rule that is super enforced, it's not going to change habits. That's part of the thing that needs to come from government as well.
The thing is, I haven't realized that so many people out there
Yeah.
have this thinking that, oh, ECEs, they have to take care of the children, even if the children are sick. But no.
Simply put, no.
Educators have not signed up for these health risks. They
Yeah.
are educator and they are caregiver, but they are not doctors, they are not nurses.
And we're not parents. And when little ones are sick, they want their parents. They want their main adults in their life.
You can't compare us to anybody outside of the field working front line. Like, you can't compare us, as Tegan was saying, to doctors or nurses. For instance, they get full health benefits. Their pay is incredibly high in comparison to ours, who are sometimes making minimum wage. And they can have health spending accounts where they get extra money and they can use that money towards other procedures that might not be included under their health benefits. So there's a lot of things that you can't compare us to. If we're not getting, first off, if we're not getting sick time off, we're not getting paid properly, and we don't have access to proper health care, other than the universal health care that's there. But if you have any other procedures that you need to do, it can be incredibly hard and very scary to go into
stressful.
a place. Yeah, and stressful. Going into a place that you don't know whether you're going to get sick or not, and if you're going to be able to handle that sickness. There's a lot to it.
And like healthcare professionals, they are trained to handle, to mitigate the risk. And we're not. And that's why we need the time to prepare for that, for training and everything.
And there's another thing. Healthcare professionals are recognized for what they do.
Yes.
They are seen with more prestige, with more respect. And I'm not saying that they don't deserve that, but there's a big difference on how the general public looks at a nurse or a doctor and how they look at an early childhood educator. I say this because my parents are both doctors, and my mom hates that I'm an early childhood educator. She thinks that it doesn't have any status. She thinks that I'm wasting my time. She thinks that I'm too good for this. It's a whole other issue, but it just goes to show that even when you're personally close to someone, our profession doesn't have the recognition that I believe it deserves.
Yeah.
And you go into healthcare, you go into nursing, you go into med school, you go into the many other healthcare professions that there are, and you know that that's a possibility. You know that if there is a pandemic, you might have to be exposed to that. You might have to, like, there's all of these things. And then with that, knowing that comes training, comes access to funding, access to protective equipment, like all of that. We don't have that. We're asked to do all of these things, and we don't have that.
And
then
we
when
take it on. We take it on all the time too, when it's not our responsibility to take on. We are very dedicated people, and it shows that, because nobody would want to stay in this field if it wasn't for our dedication and our passion, because of just all the issues surrounding it. But we can't take this stuff on. It's not our responsibility.
No.
And that's the message I think everybody really needs to have in their head is it's we can't hold that. We can try, but we shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, early childhood educators should not feel guilty for thinking about their well-being.
In their own safety, yeah. And this is the thing too, like when you were saying that people think that educators just need to take care of children no matter what. So we're educators, right? We deliver a curriculum. We deliver education. Because we work with 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 1-year-olds, because we work with young children, part of that curriculum is caregiving. Part of that curriculum is singing songs. Part of that curriculum is giving lots of hugs. Part of that curriculum is showing and modeling reactions and dealing with emotions. It's very different than educating a college student, but it's education no matter what. It should be seen as just as valuable, because you cannot successfully get to college if you didn't have a quality, safe, early start. right? So
No.
we're at the base of the educational pyramid, but we're not funded in a proportional way
Got it.
of the you got what I meant, in the proportional way that of what's
That we deserve.
owed, yeah, of what's owed to what we do.
Yeah.
It pulls on my heartstrings to think about these kind of things, right?
I think that's an excellent point. When Patricia mentioned that part of our education is caregiving, I wanted to bring up the image that people usually associated with early childhood educators is changing diapers.
Yeah.
And as much as I don't think that is part of early childhood education, I do a lot of education through changing diaper. It's the perfect bonding time between me and my infants. And we have a lot of social emotional learning going on when we're changing diapers. And most people don't know that.
And also if you think about it as an adult, right? I would say that most typical adults don't wear diapers. I'm not talking about the elderly, I'm talking about adults. We don't wear diapers. We got there because someone supported us, because someone taught us how to wipe our butts.
Yeah.
That is a skill that you have to learn. It is not something like breathing. It's not something like blinking or digesting your food. It's not something that your body naturally does. We need to learn those skills. And because of the way that society is, parents have to go to work. So children need to learn that not only from the parents at home, but they need to learn from their educators as well. There's this image that was going around on Instagram before we closed, and it was this teacher sitting with a bunch of preschoolers, and they were all sitting on these little stools, and the teacher had two balloons behind.
Oh, I know what you're mentioning.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I love that.
The teacher had two balloons where her bum would be, and she was showing the kids how you wipe from front to back. Because that's part of education. That's part of learning how to be a human.
Yeah.
We all know how to wipe our butts, hopefully, because someone taught us. And that's part of what we do.
We have to teach them how to take care of themselves so that they can do other things later on. And it's not saying that we don't teach them other things. We go over language, we go over social emotional skills, we go over science and STEM and mathematics and things like that. But they need to learn how to take care of themselves first before they can even process those parts.
You need to learn how to walk before you can run. You need to learn how to feed yourself before you can cook food. It's the natural building blocks of skills, right? Like some of my favorite moments, some of my funniest moments in childcare happen during bathroom routine, because that's when children ask about their bodies. That's when they ask about my body. Matricia, do you have a vagina? Does your mommy have a vagina? You know, like that's when they learn about everything. I spend more time like on regular life. I spend more time with my kids at work than I do with my partner who I live with.
Yes.
Right? So I was getting home, he was going to work. And I was spending 7 hours a day with my children. And that means that they're also spending a lot of their time with me. And a lot of the skills that they need to learn when they are 3 would come from me and my room partners. Meaning, whether it be how to wipe your bum to how to count or how to hold a pencil. Because at 3.5, 4 years old, they're just learning how to do those things. So it's just a lot of feelings.
And not to mention that most of the skills a child learns with us from their early years stay with them for life.
Yeah, exactly. And they are extended at home, right? Like when we talk about putting on your snow pants or putting on your jacket, and we always have those conversations with parents of like, we're encourage your child to learn by themselves. Look how well they're doing. Because that's how we learn. You have to learn to put on the sleeves first before you can zip it up. But anyways, I could go on with this for 45 hours without a break. So let's keep going down the core recommendations.
The next point is one of the most needed points,
yes,
I think.
Which is immediate extension of pandemic pay to all program staff and funding to ensure a $25 minimum wage for all registered early childhood educators.
That would the average, which is about $17 to $19, by at least $8. Can you imagine what a difference that would make? You could qualify for a mortgage maybe by yourself. Crazy. You wouldn't
not in Toronto. Not in
okay.
Toronto.
Yeah, I'm not in Toronto, but
Yeah.
Do you guys remember, like, from one of the webinars that we were on,
Yeah.
there was an information saying that some ECE working in emergency childcare
Yeah.
are receiving $17 an hour right now.
Which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
crazy.
Nobody that is working right now, grocery store clerks, delivery people, doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, caretaking people at hospitals, nobody that is putting literally their lives and their families' lives on the line right now should be making that little. It is not fair, especially
I just
when
started my part-time job, and like I'm making $16.50 doing part-time, and I don't have to deal with anybody.
And you're also like, it's a job that, because I know what you do.
Yes.
I know it's a job that it's not like being an educator. You don't have to go to college for at least 2 years for it.
No.
Right? So that amount, that investment in education and that investment in time of your life is not being recognized properly. That's not okay. I did some math with an A, not math with an E. I sometimes am told that it sounds the same when I say it. So this is calculating what the gross amount of money you would make, okay? So I work 35 hours a week. That's 7 hours of paid labor every day, okay? So based off that, if someone works that amount of hours for $14 an hour, which is the minimum wage in Ontario, they make $19.60 a month. But that's without any tax, anything. If they make $17 an hour, which is around the lower part of the average for RECEs in Ontario, they make $23.80 a month without deductions. Okay? If we jumped that to $25 an hour, it jumps from $23.80 to $3,500. $3,500 a month is almost double of what you would be making on minimum wage. The difference that would make in so many educators' lives is ridiculous. In the best way possible.
And let's just make this clear. $25 is the minimum wage for early childhood educators. It
that
should
we're
be
proposing in
the
this
minimum
report.
Wage.
Yeah.
Not the only wage. We should honestly be making more than that.
And how much is childcare in Toronto?
Yeah. And that's the thing. We need this to come from the government, because we can't put it on parents to be paying our wages.
That's not fair.
Yeah.
They can't be making up that difference.
No.
So this has to be a publicly funded initiative by the government.
So I just did a quick Google search. I don't know if you girls are looking at the screen right now, because I'm sharing my screen. So early childhood education and care is a largely female sector, right? And
98%.
it takes 2 years to become a registered early childhood educator minimum, and to come out of that and make from $17 to $19 an hour on average. So I just Googled average salary for mechanics in Ontario. I think that most mechanics out there go to school for about the same time that educators do. And the average salary that Google is showing me is $29.78.
Yeah, my partner did mechanics.
Did he go to school for 2 years too?
3 years. About the same time. Yeah.
How, think about the difference that makes for women, right? We're a largely female sector. So women are already more likely to, for example, be in abusive situations. Yeah. Sometimes people stay in abusive situations because they cannot afford to move out. If we boost pay for people in those kind of vulnerable situations, that could mean literally saving their lives.
Yes.
There's so many levels to it that it's just I'm fortunate enough that I make a very decent and professional wage where I work, but I'm the very minimal minority. It sounds funny to say the minimal minority, but that's what it is.
Even can I just say something that pisses me off too? Is sometimes when you're having a conversation with somebody and they go, well, women typically choose jobs that pay less. And I go, that's because our work isn't valued. It's not that we're choosing jobs that pay less. First off, we're choosing jobs that we think matter, like how you chose a job that you think matter. It's just the difference that society values your job and they don't value our work.
Yep.
So that's just one of my pet peeves. So if you hear anybody saying that, please tell them off.
Correct them. Tell them to go fuck themselves.
Yes, please. And this is why, I think this is part of the report too. This is why making childcare right this time is so important. Otherwise, we're gonna just undo everything good we've ever done for women, for the women's movement.
Yeah. What was that line about recovery, Tegan, that we were talking about?
No recovery without recovery. No recovery without childcare.
Boo, yeah. So I'm doing another search here around salary. So the starting salary, I'm thinking about other professions that are 2 years of schooling, and I'm researching on practical nursing. So it takes 2 years in Ontario to become a practical nurse, right? A 2-year college diploma, just like registered early childhood educators. While the average salary for us is $17 to $19 an hour, and that doesn't necessarily mean starting salary. It could be you could have been in that job for a while and not get a raise. The starting salary for a practical nurse is $29 an hour, which obviously it's well deserved, if not more. But why is one job more valued than the other? Why are educators not seen as valuable as nurses? I don't get it. I don't
I
get
have
it.
a sneaky suspicion. Okay, this correct me if I'm wrong, but every time men enter a certain field, haven't you noticed the value goes up?
Yeah, I do see that pattern, but I think that practical nurses are still majority women. And obviously, in a time like this, that we're talking about a global pandemic, a global health crisis, nurses are extremely needed, right? So they should have even a boost to that salary. But when we're talking about the post-pandemic world, childcare and early learning is extremely needed. So boost those salaries, boost the value that you put on the care work to reopen the freaking economy. And we're not even including the amount, and I think that comes with the next core recommendation, which is pedagogical support, including trauma-informed practice. 74% of the people with the surveys suggested this would make them feel safe going back to work. We are going to need quality early learning and childcare for the social and emotional recovery of our children. If you're thinking about the kids that are quote unquote stuck at home with a loving family, with parents that are healthy mentally, that still have access to their salaries, that are still able to put food on the table, are still able to pay rent or mortgage or whatever it is. Those children are in a very privileged position, yes, but even they are going to be suffering through this because they're not seeing their friends anymore, their routines were heavily changed, and their parents are stressed. Even if they have access to all that, it's stressful to change routine. Change sucks.
And because of the reduced ratio, the children may not see their familiar educators again.
Or familiar friends, yeah.
Even to that extent of a familiar center, they could be completely kicked out of their center and have to find, some parents have to find new spaces.
And then when we think about the children who are not in those privileged positions, when we think about the children that don't have access to food all the time, whose parents are not doing so well mentally, whose parents might have a substance abuse problem, a mental health problem, those children are going to need quality care to recover from that, to be supported through. I approach my practice as I want to be the adult that I did not have as a child. This might be too personal, but I love my parents, but they were not very good at being parents. And being 3, being 4, being 5 was very hard for me. Very hard, very lonely, very abusive. And I had teachers that made me feel welcome and valued and loved my quirkiness and my love for books and the crazy things I did with my hair. I loved putting all the berets I have on my hair at once. And I tried to be that. Yeah. I got something. I try to be that adult for children all the time. And I think there's a lot of educators out there that even if they didn't go through what I went through or they went through different situations, they are thinking about that. They want to be a good presence, a good influence, and a safe space for children. Because like you were saying before, Stephanie, like people stay in this field because they're passionate about what they do. Because we love working with children and we want to support them in their growth and in their development. That needs to be valued, and we need to be trained to deliver that care after this crisis, because that has also affected us. Right? I've been stuck at home for almost 3 months now. And before, me and my partner never fought. And because we've been in close quarters all the time, we've been fighting more than ever. It's not a lot, but it makes a difference. And that's going to affect me when I go back to work too. Right?
Yeah.
So like we need to think about that, about the mental health of educators and children too.
Yeah. In the case we have to wear mask or anything like that in front of the children, we need time to prepare them for that.
Yeah. To get used to that.
Yeah.
The last core recommendation that we're going to highlight in this part of the episode is clear provincial directives on eligibility of vulnerable staff to access adapted work or to refuse work. So if you don't feel safe to go to work, or you have underlying health condition, or someone in your household has immunity issues, you should have the right to say, I cannot go back to work. Can I keep working from home? Can we adapt so that I do something else? We need to be protected that way as well, because the few of us that were able to afford having children, she cries as her eggs die out.
Don't say that.
But we need to protect our children and our parents and our families as well. We're not sacrificial lambs, and neither are they. Do we want to add anything else regarding the recommendations? I mean, there's so much we could talk about, but
Yeah, there's a lot more recommendations, and I highly recommend. It is a little bit of a long document, but if you have the time, please read over it yourself. Take it day by day like we did. We read a little bit each day. We went back and discussed with other people. If you want to not call us, but message us. You don't have our phone numbers, so you can't do that. But if you want to talk to us about it and we can banter back and forth about it, sure. Give us shoot us an email or a direct message, and we'll gladly speak to you about it.
Oh, you know what people should do? You should get together with your coworkers and use this as a starting for a book club. Because an informed person is a powerful person. If you know your rights, if you know what we're asking the government to do, and you hold them accountable, you are advocating for yourself, and you're advocating for the sector. And in the middle of a health crisis, advocating for yourself and for your sector might mean saving lives.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was just going to say, even if you don't have much time, on the OCBCC website, they have a summary, like a shortened version of this that you can read over. And we will make sure to have those links available on our social media.
We have those links available on all our social media, but if you're listening to this right now and are thinking, oh, I wonder what the link is, it's childcareontario.org, and that's it. And it's the first thing that you see when you open the website.
There was just one thing that was highlighted at the end of this, and it can sound pretty scary when you just hear it like this, but we have to think of it rationally. And it's basically this budget, the budget that they have out for childcare right now, with this new plan, is going to be tripled.
Would have to be tripled to meet the recommendations, yeah.
Yes. So although this seems like a lot, it will actually provide a big return later on. More families can enter the labor market, spend the money that they were previously using on childcare into other parts of the economy, and the quality of care can benefit children's overall well-being, which in turn will require less aid spending in intervention since money is being put into prevention. So we really need to keep that in mind. Tripling, yes, scary idea, but the return and the benefit to society overpowers that immensely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Well said. Show us the money for childcare. So we're going to wrap up this part of the discussion. And as we do at the end of every episode, we're going to share a story from childcare. It's Stephanie's turn.
I'm terrible at telling stories. So
no, you are not.
Go, Stephanie, go.
But basically this one has stuck in my head forever, and it's hilarious, and I don't think I will ever forget it. A parent and her son, the son just being about 2 at the time, were talking about not hitting at childcare. And she turns to him and says, "What do you do instead of hitting?" And he gets this giant grin on his face, and he goes, "I bite them." I bite them. So he wants to eat them instead. It was so hard not to laugh. Oh my goodness. But yeah.
It's the original Baby Shark.
Yes. Yeah, the OG.
OG Baby Shark.
It's time to say this. The Childcare Revolution podcast is not affiliated with any universities, colleges, associations, or institutions. Just a couple of passionate educators speaking some thoughts into the air. Thank you for joining us. Please like, follow, and subscribe to listen to more episodes of the Childcare Revolution. Send your childcare stories, questions, and comments to our email, childcarerevolutionpod@gmail.com.
I know what we were going to say. Listeners, we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can find our podcast on Spotify, YouTube, SoundCloud, and now on Google Play.
Sorry,
Yay!
if you guys didn't hear that, that was Google Play. I messed up by trying to do a drum roll.
Oh. So we'll see you for part 2 when we are going to go through the recommendations with a parent. Dun dun!